Returning to the Rice Hotel and its history, we find that after Sam Houston had secured his victory, the Republic's capital was no longer the Capitol Hotel. In 1877, J. L. Barnes became manager of the hotel and it was renamed the Barnes House. In 1881, a Colonel A. Grosbeck razed the building, constructed a new hotel and returned to the old Capitol moniker. This owner failed, and in 1886 William Marsh Rice acquired it by paying its back taxes. The name William can be traced to the German Wilhelm, which can be defined as willful helm or helmet. Therefore, at least partially, one can link William with Kennedy, Cianadiac, ugly head, wounded head, helmet head. Marsh implies a tract of low and very wet land. Rice is grown in just such an area. The term marsh rice was of common usage in denoting the cereal plant rice, which grew in the marshy land that is now the Houston area. Rice is also a fertility symbol. Another Hugh town is the capital of the Scilly Islands. England's Scilly Islands are located just off Land's End. The climate there is semi-tropical and flowers, plum trees, and oranges grow and bear in profusion, while a short distance away the weather is harsh and cold. There is an English legend that the Sicilies are all that is left of the Lyonnese. Lyonnese supposedly adjoined Cornwall, and it was from Lyonnese that King Arthur's men fled after he was slain. The Sicilies were once noted for the orange girls that originated there, among whom was Nell Gwyn, the mistress of Charles I.L. Orange girls are historically associated with prostitution, show business, plague and sorcery. At the Rice Hotel, parties were held where young ladies were made presents of oranges by their escorts. This was a fertility rite. William Marsh Rice and his wife deeded the hotel to Rice University and stipulated that the hotel must be called Rice in perpetuity. Before Marsh died in 1900, the hotel was known to be unfitting for ladies to even pass by on the same side of the street. This reputation emanates from men in rocking chairs who used to conduct bull sessions under the hotel balcony. A rocking chair hierarchy was created. Names were placed on the backs of the chairs and stored in the hotel to be fetched by a Negro bellman when called for by the particular chair owner. There was a recognized status in the positioning of the chairs during these conversations, and importance was attached to whose chair was next to whose. Such rocking chair pageantry went on for years, and some of the chairs were jokingly referred to as the Sam Houston chair and the John Kennedy chair in reference to those two 19th century Houston personages. The entire rocking chair pecking order and the attendant symbolism of passing the chair, squabbles over revisions in chair hierarchy, and references at the time to empty rocking chairs moved by the wind as having been moved by Old Sam Houston or Old John Kennedy were little more than open-air Masonic rituals. In Masonry, the induction of the master-elect into his office is labeled as passing the chair. The seat of the master of the lodge is called the Oriental Chair of King Solomon, hence, chair is a technical term signifying the office of Master Mason. President John F. Kennedy was of course of the rocking chair set insofar as he had a rocking chair and was symbolically associated with it in the group mind via numerous photographs, news stories, and anecdotes. One of the photographs shows the president in a master chair while Prime Minister Nehru of India was seated on a divan. Divan is a word used on the fez worn by Shriners, Masons. The Oriental chair and divan are symbolically associated. On April 25, 1961, President Kennedy sent a letter to the publisher of the New York Times, Arthur Sulzberger, welcoming him to the Rocking Chair Club. In a handwritten notation on the letter, JFK inscribed, "You will recall what Senator Dirksen said about the rocking chair, it gives you a sense of motion without any sense of danger." Kennedy's black walnut rocking chair was almost identical to the one in which President Lincoln was seated, in Ford's Theater, at his assassination. Recall the Rice Hotel ritual of having a Negro bellman carry out a rocking chair on cue. The president's rocking chair was publicly carried out of the White House while the Kennedy funeral ritualism was transpiring, by a Negro. Coincidence or conspiracy? The killing of the king never allow anyone the luxury of assuming that because the dead and deadening scenery of the American city off dreadful night is so utterly devoid of mystery, so thoroughly flat-footed, sterile, and infantile, so burdened with the illusory gloss of baseball, hot dogs, apple pie and Chevrolet that it is somehow outside the psychosexual domain. The eternal pagan psychodrama is escalated under these 17 modern conditions precisely because sorcery is not what 20th century man can accept as real. Thus the killing of the king right of November, 1963 is alternately diagnosed as a conflict between anti-Castro reactionaries and the forces of liberalism, big business, and the big bankers, this or that wing of the intelligence community and so on. Needless to say, each of these groups has a place in the symbolism having to do with the Kennedy assassination. But the ultimate purpose of that assassination was not political or economic but source, for the control of the dreaming mind and the marshalling of its forces is the omnipotent force in this entire scenario of lies, cruelty and degradation. Something died in the American people on November 22, 1963. Call it idealism, innocence, or the quest for moral excellence. It is this transformation of human beings which is the authentic reason and motive for the Kennedy murder, and until so-called conspiracy theorists can accept this very real element, they will be reduced to so many eccentrics amusing a tiny remnant of dilettantes and hobbyists. President Kennedy and his wife left the Temple Houston and were met at midnight by tireless crowds present to cheer the virile sun god and his dazzlingly exotic wife, the Queen of Love and Beauty, in Fort Worth. On the morning of November 22, they flew to Gate 28 at Love Field, Dallas, Texas. The number 28 is one of the correspondences of Solomon in Kabbalistic numerology. The Solomonic name assigned to 28 is Baal, cf. Set 4, Kennedy, Baal and Bouvier. On the 28th degree of latitude in the state of Texas is the site of what was once the giant Kennedy Ranch. On the 28th degree is also Cape Canaveral, from which the moon flight was launched, made possible not only by the president's various feats but by his death as well, for the placing of Freemasons on the moon could occur only after the killing of the king. The 28th degree of Templarism is the King of the Sun degree. The President and First Lady arrived in Air Force One codenamed Angel, cf. subset Love Field. The motorcade proceeded from Love Field to Dealey Plaza. Dealey Plaza is the site of the first Masonic temple in Dallas, now razed, and there is a marker attesting to this fact in the plaza. Important protective strategy for Dealey Plaza was planned by the New Orleans CIA station, whose headquarters were in a Masonic temple building, cf. coincidence or conspiracy by the Committee to Investigate Assassinations, Inc. Dallas, Texas is located 10 miles south of the 33rd degree of latitude. The 33rd degree is the highest in Freemasonry, and the founding lodge of the Scottish Rite in America was created in Charleston, SC. Exactly on the 33rd degree. Dealey Plaza is close to the Trinity River. At 12:22 p.m. the motorcade proceeded down Main Street toward the Triple Underpass, traveling first down Bloody Elm St. The latter was the scene of numerous gunfights, stabbings, and other violence, and it is the location of the Majestic Theater, the Pawn Shop Negro District, and an industrial district. It was also the home of the Blue Front Tavern, a Masonic hangout in the grand tradition of tavern masonry. Sam Adams and the Masons of the American Revolution did much of their conspiring at the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston. One of the many bars claiming the honor of being the first Masonic lodge is the Bunch of Grapes Tavern, also in Boston. The Blue Front was the site of the Brock-Enman ritual, in which various members of the Brotherhood of the Broom swept the floor and tended some fierce Javelino pigs. The Blue Front was once a firehouse and was still sporting the pole in the late 20s. This is extremely germane symbolism. The national offices of the Texaco Oil Corporation are located on Elm St., Dallas. Its chief products are Haviland, Javelino, oil and Fire Chief gasoline. On the corner of Bloody Elm and Houston is the Sexton Building. Sexton is heavily laden with graveyard connotations. It is closely associated to the beetles of the genus Necrophorus or sexton beetles, so called because they bury the remains of tiny animals with their eggs. Bloody Elm, Maine, commerce form a trident pattern in alignment with the Triple Underpass, as any Dallas map will show. Many analysts contend that at least 3 assassins were involved in the crossfire ambush of our Catholic president. In Setil, the legend of inverse Masonic assassination was studied. This is the principle whereby Masonic assassins are called enemies of Masonry or useless or worthless. It is a prime tenet of Masonry that its assassins come in threes. Masonic assassins are known in the code of the lodge as the unworthy craftsmen. Because Masonry is obsessed with the earth as game board, tessellation, and the ancillary alignments necessary to facilitate the game, it is inordinately concerned with railroads and railroad personnel to the extent that outside of lawyers and circus performers, no other vocation has a higher percentage of Masons than railroad workers. Minutes after John Fitzgerald Kennedy was murdered, 3 hobos were arrested at the rail yard behind Dealey Plaza. No records of their identities have ever been revealed, nor the identity of the arresting officer. All that remains of those few minutes are a series of photographs which have reached legendary proportions among persons concerned with uncovering the real forces and persons behind the assassination. These pictures have been impressed upon modern consciousness in a way that perhaps only Carl Gustav Jung could detect in terms of psychological impact. The only similar image which has also become a symbol of the people's inability to uncover and overcome evil are the 3 derelicts of Sam Beckett's play, Waiting for Godot, whose entire theme is the futility of waiting for answers or expecting to penetrate the shroud of who controls us. The 3 and trident allusions pertain uniformly to Magicus Sexualis. Paracelsus used the latter to overcome impotence. In the 7 books of the Magic Archidox, a trident is listed as the remedy for anyone wishing to overcome the machinations of perverted men and to regain virility. Dealey Plaza breaks down in this manner. Dia means goddess in Latin, and ley can pertain to law or rule in the Spanish, or lines of preternatural geographic significance in the pre-Christian nature religions of the English, Watkins. For many years Dealey Plaza was underwater at different seasons, being flooded by the Trinity River until the introduction of a flood control system. Thus, the Dealey, goddess rule, Plaza is present at the Trinity site of Kennedy's killing. It should be noted that the detonation of the alchemical creation and destruction of primordial matter, the first atomic bomb, occurred at the so-called Trinity site, located on the 33rd degree of latitude. To this trident Neptune site came the Queen of Love and Beauty and her spouse, the scapegoat in the killing of the King Right, the Cianadiac, the Gaelic word for Kennedy meaning ugly head or wounded head. In Scotland, the Kennedy Koto farms and iconography in general is connected with folklore. Their plant badge is an oak and their crest badge has a dolphin on it. Now what could be more coincidental, if you want to call it that, than for JFK to get shot in the head near the oak tree at Dealey Plaza? Do you call that a coincidence? Some people have become quite aware of episodic related events and their apparent systematic arrangement. Robert K. G. Temple, a Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society of England and the author of the book called Serious Mysteries. Robert Anton Wilson, a former editor at Playboy magazine who wrote in collaboration with Robert J. Shea the novel called Illuminatus, and John C. Lilly, M.D., who experimented on dolphins, i.e. porpoise, and who has written such books as The Human Biocomputer and The Center of the Cyclone, are seemingly aware of episodic related events, and Dr. Lilly writes about a hypothetical cosmic coincidence control center. They are themselves part of a systematic arrangement of episodic related events that assume they are unaware of. Attention is called to them for what they are seemingly aware of. The systematic arrangement of the overall pattern of symbolical things having to with the killing of Kennedy, when properly evaluated, indicates that he was a scapegoat in a sacrifice. In the symbolism in that sacrifice we recognize the blood-smeared calling card of the arch-criminal. Their evil purpose in such macabre ritualism is further recognizable in patterns of symbolism culminating in the final making manifest all that is hidden. Set 7 Oswald means divine strength. The diminutive 19 form of the word is Os or Oz, a Hebrew term denoting strength. The role which divine strength played in the Dealey goddess rule killing of the king ritual should be given careful consideration. One should also note the significance of Jack Ruby's killing, destroying, of Oswald in reference to the ruby slippers of the Wizard of Oz, which one may Derived as a fairy tale but which nevertheless symbolizes the immense power of ruby light, otherwise known as the laser. The bionic Lee Harvey Oswald may have undergone biotelemetry implantation in the Soviet Union while a volunteer at a behavior control center at Minsk. Oswald roomed with Cubans and was allegedly friendly with a Castro man identified only as being burly and a key man. Burly can mean burlicue or burlesque. The key, of course, is one of the most important symbols in Masonry and the symbol of silence. If Oswald was the result of some Soviet Frankenstein process, why did he have to travel several thousand miles for such treatment when it is a routine operation in America? Here in the good old USA it is performed in hospitals, prisons, psychiatric centers and even back alleys. While such activities of the Mill of Dread are pro forma at a variety of institutions at the present, there was once a time when it was deemed necessary to do such work at Walter Reed Hospital. These implants were back alley operations in which the victims were overpowered in some place or other, drugged and then dragged to this government hospital. They were operated on, continued on a heavy drug regimen in a state that varied from somnolent to comatose, for a number of days. The electrical function of the victim was recorded and monitored and the biotelemetry plant tested. Subsequently the victims were brainwashed and returned to the place where they had been seized. The targets then continued their existence, unaware of how their bodies had been invaded and their autonomy stolen. Of course this was a select procedure and not all of the staff or any of the patients necessarily knew what was taking place. Occasionally victims were returned to Walter Reed because of abscesses at the incision or for the replacement of the obsolete device with an updated one. Biotelemetry implants were made in various parts of the body depending on the desired effect and function. Strange autopsy number 2. Like the disgraceful treatment of the autopsy of President Kennedy, Oswald's is similarly weird, although more in the nature of the thing than simply what happened to the records of it. In point of fact, Oswald was literally butchered in the post-mortem examination. Pieces were actually cut out of his body. The trenchant incision in his torso resembled a huge Y which ran from the area of his groin to the solar plexus region. From there incisions were made to the right and left armpits. It is also probable that he was castrated. The so-called two horns of the letter Y supposedly symbolize two different paths of virtue and vice, the right branch leading to the former and the left to the latter. The letter is sometimes referred to as the littera Pythagoreae, the letter of Pythagoras littera Pythagoreae, discrimine secta bicorni, humani vitae specium prefer videtur. The letter of Pythagoras parted by its two-branched division appears to exhibit the image of human life. In the 47th problem of Euclid, see set il, sex geometry, lies a secret of the third degree of Masonry. Pythagoras is called by Freemasons our ancient friend and brother. One of Pythagoras's main doctrines was the system of metempsychosis, which pertains to the passing of a human soul into the body of an animal. Perhaps this was the intention of the autopsy. By incising in Oswald's body the letter of Pythagoras, they sought to expedite transmigration, and they may even have gone as far as feeding sections of Oswald's corpse to the intended animal, for this too is a practice of what used to be widely feared as necromancy. Arlington necrology. The Kennedy and Oswald burials were both at Arlington, JFK at the National Cemetery near Washington, D.C. and Oswald a Rose Hill Cemetery near Arlington, Texas. Arlington is a word of significance in Masonic sorcery and mysticism, and it has a hidden meaning that has to do with necrolatry. At the Kennedy grave site there is a stone circle, and in its middle a fire that is called an eternal flame by some. The fire in the middle of the circle represents a point in the circle. The same type of symbolism is recognizable in Kennedy's bier and coffin being in the center of the rotunda in the Capitol. A point in a circle symbolized the sun in ancient sun worship. It was also a symbol of fecundity, with the point symbolizing a phallus and the circle a lingam, kunt. At the Oswald grave site stands a small tree. There exists an old belief that a tree which grows at or on a grave is embodied with the spirit force of the person buried at that site, and that a twig or branch taken from such a tree has magical powers. Suggest that Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, Mrs. Marguerite Clavery Oswald, should gently remove a twig from the tree at her son's grave and then at every opportunity touch FBI agents, CIA operatives, policemen, etc., with that same twig. Such a procedure couldn't help but be more efficacious in bringing the murders of JFK to justice than the Warren Commission was. Marina Oswald and his Russian lived at 487 Magazine Street in New Orleans from April to September 1963. It was at this time that Oswald was in contact with a Mr. Novel, a French Quarter, Storyville, tavern owner. This nuance can be considered a forecast of the random and contrasting versions of the Oswald story. Marina means sea maiden in Latin. Nerus, the old man of the Mediterranean, who thought only good thoughts and never told a lie, had 50 daughters, called sea maidens. They had the reputation of being nice. On the other hand, there was another type of sea maiden who were called sirens, and they did not have a nice reputation. Reputedly they lured sailors to their death. It might have been downright hard to tell one from the other. Well, a Marina played in a Soviet film entitled The Cranes Are Flying, and some believe it was the Marina who married Lee Harvey Oswald. Ibycus, who supposedly lived circa 550 BC, was attacked and mortally wounded near Corinth. Before he expired he asked a flock of cranes to avenge him. After a brief interval a play was performed in Corinth in one of the open-air theaters, and a flock of cranes hovered over the audience. Suddenly a man cried in panic, "The cranes of Ibycus! The Avengers!" In so doing he revealed himself as one of the murderers of Ibycus, and he and all of the others who took part in the murder of Ibycus were discovered and executed. If the people responsible for the murder of our Catholic president are ever executed, it would take a number of firing squads working night and day, some time to execute all of those arch criminals. Marina Oswald supposedly discovered a statue in New Orleans which depicts a ride on a dolphin, i.e. porpoise. That porpoise was said to be a passionate porpoise. After the death of her husband, Marina Oswald married Jess Porter in Fate, Texas. The Fates were three sisters who were sometimes designated as the Moiri or Parsi and also as the Grali. Individually they were called Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, and reputedly they were responsible, at birth, for the qualities of good and evil in a person. In other words, they were given to tending to other people's business. Clotho, the spinner, spun the thread of life. Lachesis, the disposer of lots, fixed the destiny of people, and Atropos, she who could be deviated, carried the shears of fate with which she cut the thread of life at death. The three Fates reputedly had eye trouble in that they had one eye between them which they took turns with, which is something like the eye that Horus and Osiris both used. Anyway, an attempt has been made to fix the destiny of people by way of a computer that is esoterically oriented, and it is called Fate. Fate, Texas, is in Rockwall County. Rockwall and Stonewall are terms of significance in Masonic sorcery, cf. subset overview. Set 8 Funerary rites. John F. Honey Fitzgerald, the grandfather of John F. Kennedy, was elected mayor of Boston thanks in part to his Wake House campaigns, which were much imitated. These consisted of a daily surveillance of the newspapers for announcements of deaths, after which a discreet sympathizer would be dispatched by Fitzgerald, and a good deal of political mileage accumulated in the bargain. For a time the Fitzgeralds lived near the former site of the Green Dragon Tavern, established around 1680 and demolished for the widening of a street in 1820. The Fitzgerald home was on Hanover Street and the Green Dragon Tavern was on Green Dragon Lane, now Union Street. The tavern boasted the first lodge room of Freemasonry in America, the St. Andrew's Lodge, located within the tavern proper. In the mysticism of the Chinese tongs, the green dragon is a death symbol. A symbol of the latter is worn on a ring or held in the hand of a hatchet man. The green dragon is supposed to impart the notion of a license to kill, for it signifies that the murder is an affair of honor. The green dragon is the guardian of the god with 1,000 eyes who protects the sanctity of the third heaven. Much of Boston's Irish population arrived in America in what were nicknamed the coffin ships. Members of the Kennedy family were acquainted with the coffin family. The Reverend William Sloane Coffin was the son of theologian Henry Sloane Coffin. Coffin the Younger was a member of the Peace Corps Advisory Council that Sergeant Shriver headed. Shriver or Shrive has the meaning of one who grants absolution to a penitent, and it was customary to call upon a Shriver before death. If the Shriver was not available, a sin-eater was summoned. The old pious cry that had to do with the request for a shriving was, "Shrive me, O Holy Land, and give me peace." To this the Shriver would respond, "Pax vobiscum." The spell lies in two words. Pax vobiscum will answer all queries. If you go or come, eat or drink, bless or ban, Pax vobiscum carries you through it all. It is as useful to a friar as a broomstick to a witch or a wand to a conjurer. Speak it but thus, in a deep grave tone, Pax vobiscum. It is irresistible watch and ward, knight and squire, foot and horse. It acts as a charm upon them all. Think, if they bring me out to be hanged tomorrow, as is much to be doubted they may, will try its weights upon the finisher of the sentence. Wamba, son of witless Sergeant Shriver, a Catholic, and Kennedy by marriage, as head of the Peace Corps and in association with the Coffin, might be considered to be in a sensitive position in relation to mystical onomatology, word wizardry. In the ancient mysteries, the aspirant could not claim a participation in the highest secrets until he had been placed in the pastos, bed, or coffin. The placing of him in the coffin was called the symbolical death of the mysteries, and his deliverance was termed a rising from the dead. The mind, says an ancient writer quoted by Stobaeus, is affected in death just as it is in the initiation into the mysteries. And word answers to word, as well as thing to thing, for burial is to die and death to be initiated. The coffin in Masonry is found on tracing boards of the early part of the last century, and has always constituted a part of the symbolism of the third degree, where the reference is precisely to the same as that of the pastos in the ancient mysteries. My emphasis. Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. President Kennedy sat at the head of a coffin table at the White House. To his back, over a fireplace, hung a portrait of Abraham Lincoln, an assassinated president. On either side of the picture were urns that resembled the type called cinerary urns, which are vessels in which the ashes of the dead are kept. Cf. Canopic jars. A book about JFK was called 3 Steps to the White House. In Masonry are what is known as the 3 symbolical steps. The 3 grand steps symbolically lead from this life to the source of all knowledge, Ibid. It must be evident to every master mason without further explanation, that the 3 steps are taken from the darkness to a place of light, either figuratively or really, over a 22 coffin, the symbol of death, to teach symbolically that the passage from darkness and ignorance of this life through death to the light and knowledge of eternal life. And this from earliest times was the true symbolism of the step. Ibid. The body of President Kennedy was placed in a coffin which was positioned in the center of a circle under the Capitol dome. The catafalque was a temporary structure of wood appropriately decorated with funeral symbols and representing a tomb or cenotaph. It forms a part of the decorations of a sorrow lodge. This Masonic encyclopedia reference is to the ceremonies of the third degree in lodges of the French Rite. Pictures taken of the Kennedy coffin and catafalque show these 2 props of the funerary rite as a point in a circle. Fecundity is the symbolic signification of the point within a circle and is a derivation of ancient sun worship. In olden lore of mystery cults and fertility religion was invariably the legend of the death of the hero god and the disappearance of his body. In the subsequent search and supposed finding of the body we see the contrivance of an elaborate psychological ruse, well known to the masters of the ancient mysteries. The body was said to have been concealed by the killer or killers of the hero god. The concealment of the body was called aphonism and is a rite of the Masonic third degree. Anyone interested in comprehending the mechanics of group mind control would do well to study the 3rd and 9th degrees in particular and all of the grades of Masonry in general. It is amazing that those persons concerned with grasping the fundamentals of secret control, attacks against volition and mass processing, have thus far ignored these elements in the secret society of Masonry, which employs these techniques as a routine part of a several hundred-year heritage of subterfuge and subversion. The disappearance of the body, this aphonism, is to be found in the assassination of President Kennedy. The president's brain was removed and his body buried without it. Dr. Cyril Wecht, Chief Medical Examiner of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, past president of the American Academy of Forensic Scientists, and a professor of pathology and law, received permission from the Kennedy family in 1972 to view the autopsy materials at the National Archives. When he routinely asked to see the brain, Wecht was told it was missing, along with the microscopic slides of the brain. Marion Johnson, curator of the Warren Commission material at the archives, said, "The brain's not here. We don't know what happened to it." Los Angeles Free Press, Special Report No. 1, PG-16. If and when the brain is recovered, the entire process will have been completed under the term uresis. In the Masonic mysteries are symbolical ladders. On the Masonic tracing board of 1776 there is a ladder with 3 steps, a significant revision of the usual ladder in such references, 7 steps. There are of course all sorts of ladders: the Brahmanical ladder, 7 steps, the Kadosh ladder, 7 steps, Rosicrucian ladder, 7 steps, Jacob's ladder, various numbers attributed, the Kabbalistic ladder, 10 steps, then there is old Tim Finnegan's ladder, which is known to some as the ladder of misfortune, and it is seemingly comprised of one false step after another. Tim Finnegan was an Irish hod carrier who fell off his ladder while drunk. Since he was apparently dead, his friends held a death watch, black watch, wake, at his coffin. This watch lived up to the traditional liveliness of these affairs, and Mr. Finnegan was splashed with some vintage Irish whiskey, Fitzgerald's, and resurrected. Finnegan's wake. After the Kennedy coffin was removed from the center of the Capitol Rotunda Circle, it was taken, with pageantry, to the street, for viewing. The funeral procession made an unplanned stop on Pennsylvania Ave. In front of the Occidental restaurant, and a picture was taken of the flag-draped Kennedy coffin with the word Occidental featuring prominently over it. In Masonry and in the lore of the Egyptian jackal god Anubis, a dead person is said to have gone west. Several months after the Kennedy funeral, Occidental Life, an insurance branch of the Transamerica Corporation, ran an advertisement for Group/Life which was proclaimed, as usual, to be new but with a turn which was indeed original. The inferential weird claim was made that until now there was only one way to cash in on group insurance, my emphasis. Apparently some rather profound changes were made in the manner of things as they are after the killing of the king had become a fait accompli. The spontaneous stop was made because of the horse Sardar, chief, a gelding, Castro, which was wearing boots pointing around to the rear in the Kennedy funerary rite. Horses figure prominently not only in the pleasure of kings but in their murders as well. James Earl Ray was convicted partly on the evidence of a white Mustang, automobile. Sirhan claimed to his psychiatrists, trans-like, that he shot Robert Kennedy for a Mustang. John F. Kennedy had demonstrated affection for the performance of a lady who was a renowned ostrich feather fan manipulator, Norma Jean Baker aka Marilyn Monroe. In Egypt, lamenting girls with ostrich feather fans sang a song of entreaty of the type that Nephthys and Isis reputedly sang as a dirge before the said partial resurrection and/or erection of Osiris. The said dirge or lamentation has become known as a Mainarose, and primarily the singers are entreating the dead to return, by singing "Come to my house" and then offering inducements of some type or other. It is a damn pity that the ritualists couldn't have had Marilyn Monroe and Rosemary Clooney sing a Mainarose at the JFK funeral, for most certainly Rosemary Clooney just couldn't believe that JFK was dead at the time and Marilyn Monroe was killed because of JFK. Now in ancient Egypt the entreaty to the dead of the type said to be performed by Isis and Nephthys was usually performed with a hawk fertility goddess statue present along with other funerary symbolism. Jacqueline Kennedy was considered fashionable, erudite, erotic, and stunningly gorgeous. Mrs. Kennedy visited an exhibition of Egyptian funerary rite symbols at the National Gallery of Art where she was photographed with a depiction of the hawk-headed divinity that was said to be named Horkentikem. At this writing there is a traveling nightmare of funerary symbolism touring this country, the Tutankhamun exhibit of the National Endowment of the Humanities. Before JFK began his Jornada del Muerto, Journey of Death, Journey of the Dead, he was photographed with Tito on the winding stairs in the White House. Tito, his real name is said to be Josip Broz, is a significant name in Masonry since it was the title given to Prince Herodim, the first judge and provost said to be appointed by King Solomon. Tito was a reputed favorite of that evil Jew whose temple was a hotbed of thievery, money changing, male and female prostitution and sorcery. This Tito presided over the Lodge of Intendants of the temple and was one of the 12 knights of the 12 tribes of Israel. Let me repeat, JFK was on some winding stairs with a man called Tito. Winding stairs are symbolically important in Masonry. The legend of the winding stair is taught in the degree of Fellow Craft. This is the second degree and a person at this grade is of course a candidate for the symbolical assassination, uresis, autopsy, coffin resurrection of the third degree. The number of steps in the winding stair are odd, although no less so than the fact that this Tito or Herodim is a name translating as those who rule over the activities of the Temple of Solomon. President Kennedy preceded Tito down the stairs to a portrait of the assassinated President Garfield where he was photographed, and another picture was taken on the stairs before a picture of Lincoln. Recall the black walnut rocker of JFK, comparable to the black walnut rocker Lincoln was assassinated in, the Lincoln Continental limousine in which Kennedy was shot, and the thousand other parallels between the two men. It's unfortunate that President Kennedy didn't trip Tito and then slide down the stair rail, for he was in a very 24 bad symbolical position as related to Masonic sorcery, and such unorthodox action might have rattled the Prince of Herodim. Tito, representing Masonic sorcery power, probably made the president a fellow ready for Masonic necromancy rites without the poor scapegoat even being aware of what was happening. Set 9. The ginkgo tree in Peru, Indiana are the famous streets of presidents named after all the presidents, including of course the assassinated ones. Other cities have similar street names, so what then is significant about Peru? Peru, Indiana is known as Circus City because it is the summer home of many circuses. The notion of the clown, as alluded to in this book's preface, is an important trickster phenomena in Freemasonry, and it is no accident that a vocation with one of the highest numbers of Freemasons is circus performers. Bob Mulholland, NBC News, Chicago, talked in Dallas to one Ferry, David Ferry. Ferry said that Oswald had been under hypnosis from a man doing a mind-reading act at Ruby's Carousel. Volume 24, Exhibit 2038, Warren Commission Report. In Peru, Indiana, at the Holman School is a tree that is nicknamed as the Assassin's Tree. This is a ginkgo tree which, in Kamakura, Japan, is known as the Iko and is over 1,000 years of age. Kamakura is associated with a number of legends having to do with the martial arts, assassinations, sex, etc. The Kamakura ginkgo grown alongside the stone steps that lead to and from the shrine of Hachiman. Allegedly, some persons have never returned from this stone ascent, having been assassinated at the top. Saint Tomo, a military ruler and later shogun, was supposedly murdered on this site. Ginkgo trees are cared for in temples where the martial arts of the ninja are practiced. The mystical toponomy of Peru, Indiana is indicative of the extraordinary intricacy of the ritual, psychological manipulation of the group mind in assassinations. Set X. The scapegoat John F. Kennedy, the one and only Catholic President of the United States, was a human scapegoat, a pharmakos. Pharmakos or pharmakvos can mean enchantment with drugs and sorcery, or beaten, crippled, or immolated. In alchemy, the killing of the king was symbolized by a crucified snake on a tau cross, a variant of the crucifixion of Christ. Jesus Christ was tortured and murdered as the result of the intrigue of the men of the Temple of Solomon who hated and feared him. They were steeped in Egyptian, Babylonian, and Phoenician mysticism. Masonry does not believe in murdering a man in just any old way, and in the JFK assassination it went to incredible lengths and took peat risks in order to make this heinous act of theirs correspond to the ancient fertility oblation of the killing of the king. Have stated time and again that the three hobos arrested at the time of the assassination in Dallas are at least as important symbolically as operationally, and that they comprise the three unworthy craftsmen of Masonry. This mechanism is at once a telling psychological blow against the victim and his comrades, a symbol of frustrated inquiry and the supposedly senseless nature of any quest into the authentic nature of the murderers, and a mirror or doppelganger of the three assassins who execute the actual murder. A study of a few frames of the public broadcasting system's presentation of Samuel, the Demon of Dry Places, Beckett's Waiting for Godot, 1977, will reveal a striking image of the three unworthy craftsmen, leading the audience through a pretended search for a certain Godot who never shows up. As for the three assassins themselves, Perry Raymond Russo told a New Orleans grand jury that, CIA agent David Ferry said, regarding the assassination of JFK, that there would have to be a minimum of 3 people involved. 2 of the persons would 25 shoot diversionary shots and the third, shoot the good shot. Ferry said that one of the 3 would have to be the scapegoat. He also said that Ferry discoursed on the availability of exit, saying that the sacrificed man would give the other 2 time to escape. Quoted by W. H. Ward in Operation Mind Control, while this writer cannot endorse the accuracy of the specifics of this testimony, the use of the words scapegoat and sacrifice in relation to an activity certain persons drunk with Cartesianism have sought desperately to limit to the sanitized confines of political and forensic science, is interesting. Set 11 Camelot. The Kennedy administration was referred to as Camelot, supposedly in joy over the renewed promise of the youthful and vigorous president, his lovely storybook wife, and the potential of new frontier reform. No doubt, if one attempted to point out the ominous symbolism of the Camelot phrase, such a person would be dismissed as trying to ruin a good thing, but that has already been accomplished by someone else, and the resulting disenchantment has prepared us to believe the worst about the real story of our internal government. A hawk is sometimes called a Merlin, and a Merlin was a sorcerer of symbolical importance in sex magic or magicka sexualis. A woman called Merlin, Angel Merlin, Angeline Merlin, was a prostitute, soiled dove, woman of common property, and a communist who went in for clandestine activity. Angeline Merlin was a member of the Italian Socialist Party Union Proletariat, and in April 1948, was elected senator and subsequently became Secretary of the Senate. A few months after being elected to her legislative post, she presented her now famous draft bill on prostitution, which is known to this day as the Merlin Law. As sorcerer of the reign of Camelot, Merlin was known to have put a goodly number of persons to sleep under a ferry. Thorn, and no doubt Camelot was partially employed, in advance, to connote to the insiders of the secret society, that a work involving secrecy and silence and the Kennedys was ensuing. The site of King Arthur's castle was not far from Tintagel, the Camel River and Camelford. The Camelot White House stories are symbolical fecal matter. Vice President Lyndon Johnson invited a Pakistani camel driver to the White House, and JFK, responding with his flashing good humor, said, "If tried, that would have ended up with camel dung all over the White House lawn." The officer in charge of the 1st Camel Corps in the U.S. Army was a certain Lieutenant Edward F. Bale. JFK was born on Beale Street, and Jacqueline Kennedy's poor Aunt Edith Bouvier was a Bale by marriage. In Quartzsite, Arizona, is a pyramid-shaped monument with the bones of a camel in it. And buried beneath it is a Syrian camel driver called High Jolly. The Camel and High Jolly Pyramid burial site is in Yuma County, Arizona. Yuma, Juma, and Yama are names of a Tibetan god of death who is the king of the dead in W. Y. Evans Wentz Tibetan Book of the Dead. This god is given the power of reading the past and future in a mirror similar to that of the black magician Tezcat of Mexican mythology. Camelot and camel symbolism are still used in a variety of supposedly ordinary communication formats to transmit cues, set agendas, and impart other esoteric information before and without the knowledge of a public which believes itself to be the most alert, knowledgeable and advanced in recorded history. For a classic example of this, the reader is asked to consult Time magazine for August 15, 1977 under the section heading Science, in which Merlinsk geneticist Dr. Roy Curtis IIL disavows the death-dealing properties of recombinant DNA by stating, "The camel's nose is under the tent," supposedly an inside joke of the researchers. Camelot turns up again in death-dealing as Project Camelot, the U.S. attack on the vicious communist regime of Allende, which ended in the execution of Salvador Allende. Readers are warned away from drawing specious conclusions regarding the nature of the conspirators simply because an occasional Marxist is eliminated. If statistics are to be the guide, the conspiracy is overwhelmingly leftist by this criteria, since the suppressed number of persons assassinated far exceed those of left-wing sympathies. The entire left-wing right-wing scenario is a chess game where various pawns are motivated by emotions to follow the orders of kings and queens whose allegiance is to psychological control. Objectives and propaganda is one of the ways that psychological control is established. Set 12. The Warren Commission. Gentlemen, don't pass me by. Don't miss your opportunity. Inspect my wares with careful eye, have a great variety. And yet there is nothing on my stall which in Faust, Walpurgis Night. These are the thoughts of a huckster which, although one not search for this creature, these days, robed all in black with a conical cap, no instead, look among the anonymous grey flannel suits, and in the boardrooms and offices of the newspapers, electronic media, government, and advertising agencies, that is, those who are not busy working for the CIA or naval intelligence, selling the public a demi-monde of lies and every form of betrayal and deceit in honor of the murderers among us who sip cocktails and watch the sun rise while John Kennedy's mutilated corpse lies crumpled below the earth. Mason Lyndon Johnson appointed Mason Earl Warren to investigate the death of Catholic Kennedy. Mason and member of the 33rd degree, Gerald R. Ford, was instrumental in suppressing what little evidence of a conspiratorial nature reached the Commission. Responsible for supplying information to the Commission was Mason and member of the 33rd degree J. Edgar Hoover. Former CIA Director and Mason Allen Dulles was responsible for most of his agency's data to the panel. Is it paranoid to be suspicious of the findings of the panel on these grounds? Would it be paranoid to suspect a panel of Nazis appointed to investigate the death of a Jew, or to suspect a commission of Klansmen appointed to investigate the death of a Negro? Representative Hale Boggs, the only Catholic on the commission, at first agreed with its findings, and when he later began to seriously question them, he was accidentally killed in a plane crash. Hoodwink. Definition: a symbol of the secrecy, silence, and darkness in which the mysteries of our art should be preserved from the unhallowed gaze of the profane. Dr. Albert Mackey, Mason, member of the 33rd degree, foremost Masonic historian of the 19th century, writing in the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. That is how they see us, as profane as cowens, outsiders, unclean and too perverted to look upon their hallowed truths. Yes, indeed, murder, sexual atrocities, mind control, attacks against the people of the United States, all of these things are so elevated, so lofty and pure as to be beyond the ken of mere humans. It was in Orwell's Animal Farm where similar profundities were proclaimed: freedom is slavery, war is peace, some are more equal than others. Part 2. Subsets and ancillaries. The cryptocracy is a brotherhood reminiscent of the ancient secret societies, with rites of initiation and indoctrination programs to develop in its loyal membership the special understanding of its mysteries. W. H. Boward, Operation Mind Control. Subset Mythos. The Knights Templar were closely allied with the sect of Assassins, a confraternity which is identified in Masonry as Ishmaelites, one resembling Ishmael, whose hand was against every man and every man's hand was against him, one at war with society. Hassan Sabah was the founder, and as chief of the assassins his title was that of 27 Sheikh el-Jabal, which is commonly translated as Old Man of the Mountain. Saba's minions were notorious users of hashish and henbane, and according to all reports, some of their trips were veritable psychedelic masterpieces. Cite this data because the assassins were widely known and referred to as the Freemasons of the East. Masonic writers do not always agree on the legend of the three assassins in their interpretations. Neither do they agree that there was a change of legend of the third degree into that of the Templar system in which James Demolay was substituted for Hiram Abiff, with the three assassins being represented by Squindiflexion, Nofodi, and the Unknown, a triad of assassins invented to inculcate a Masonic modus operandi. The wretched Sirhan Bishara Sirhan is one of the three assassins and an Ishmaelite. Lee Harvey Oswald, Divine Power, is publicly linked in the group mind to the assassination and in this symbolical way can be said to be the second of the three assassins. Cagliostro was made a Mason on April 1, 1776, in London, England, at Esperance Lodge No. 289, which at that time met at the King's Head Tavern. Cagliostro is credited with having developed a system of magic called Egyptian Masonry. His teachings were based on occult material in a manuscript entitled Maconnery Egyptian, which was ordered to be burned by the public executioner. Many of these teachings dealt with the ways in which Magica Sexualis could be used for the summoning of forces. Mesmeric Masonry, aka Egyptian Masonry, Magnetic Masonry, was devised in collaboration with the pioneer hypnotist and master mason Anton Mesmer. One does not have to search far, at least in this regard, to note the more than casual relationship to hypnosis which existed in Mesmeric Masonry. This 18th century mind control is the heritage of 20th century American and British intelligence agencies, which have always been Freemasonic in organization and interest, if for no other reason than the important head start Masonry has had in the behavioral sciences. Perhaps the basis of sonic mind control, which is described in our day as the avant-garde of behavior modification, can be discovered in the interests of Freemasons Benjamin Franklin and Anton Mesmer in the hauntingly delicate melody of the glass harp. Together, Mesmer and Cagliostro formed the Order of Universal Harmony, whose fundamental principle lay in the idea that a relationship of harmony and accord between people exists, or a relationship of discord between people exists for the same reasons. The former relationship was referred to as rapport. This rapport might appropriately be called Fellotrice Masonry. Masonry is actually thoroughly tantric, and Tantrism preaches that the sexual organs are instruments of magic, and that it is the duty of the tantric to utilize them to that purpose. In tantric symbolism, the procreative organs are called lingam for the penis and yoni for the vagina, and are sometimes represented as a point within a circle. The lingam represented by the point was supposed to be the symbol of transcendent life, and the yoni or circle allegedly represented the feminine power in nature. The point in the circle can also represent the union of male with female, resulting in the union of God and humanity. The Masons apply this fertility information to their own death rites, ritual assassination, the symbolical uresis, and the autopsy. The latter comes from the Greek, to see with one's own eyes. In the ancient mysteries, an autopsy signaled the communication of mystical secrets. After the autopsy, the corpse, or in the case of ritual, the fellow acting as the corpse, is placed in a coffin, and the coffin on a catafalque, and the catafalque in the center of a circle. There the symbolical corpse awaits resurrection. In this necromancy, the corpse actually signifies the lingam, and as such his coming to life again is supposed to be an erection. The individuals who practice fertility and death rites actually believe that such rites impart mystical power. Stonewalling, the brotherhood of stonemasons of the Middle Ages, is traced to the Roman college, Collegia Cementariorum. The Cementarii, stonemasons, did the manual labor of construction. They were mystically oriented in the same manner as the pontifices, and since they were working on sacred edifices under the direction of the sacred hierarchy, they attached special significance to measurement, numbers, and the dimensions of the physical universe in much the same manner as the god Kronos Saturn was supposed to govern these areas. A brief mention of the development of Gothic cathedral building is in order. The Masons, of course, actually did begin as pious and religious men whose task it was to make the kalakagathes, the combining of truth and beauty, a reality in stone. Nevertheless, this was short-lived and the corruption began almost immediately. An examination of the statuary devoted to Mary on these buildings is revealing. Originally, the depiction of the Mother of God was of a pure virgin, the ideal for all women. Soon, however, her likeness was molded as a real-life mother of great, natural beauty. Supposedly the faithful could relate to her new humanity, but they also sacrificed her otherworldly distance and holiness. The next step occurs when she is molded into the Magna Mater, the Earth Mother and fertility goddess, which is pleasing to Masonry. Finally, in the 13th and 14th centuries, she becomes all too human, as at the Cathedral of Amiens, at the south portal in the form of the soubrette Picard. She is actually degenerated into a coquette, or one who has a tendency to engage in intrigue, and this is the Masonic influence in Gothic and on the cult of Mary. The Brotherhood of Stonemasons were the sole depository of such secrets of transformation, secrets which would one day be applied to a similar transformation of human women. The stonemasons, as a mystical labor union, had certain powers of jurisdiction over the laborers of their day, and with masses of such personnel formed an intimate connection with the fraternity of Freemasons. The connection is so intimate that it is difficult to delineate the history of the one from the other, and their development is parallel. This union occurred at the same time as the decline of knighthood in Europe, even though modern Masons love to infer that their forebears were paradigms of chivalric rectitude. This is nonsense. The almost total subversion of stonemasonry took place in the 14th century. The decline of knighthood did not come until the 14th century, when the money power of the towns destroyed the older agricultural order and courtly traditions degenerated into Don Quixotery. Gothic sculpture. The members of the Brotherhood in Germany took the name of Steinmetzen, and Grand Lodges were established in Strasbourg, Vienna, Cologne, and Zurich. The Grand Lodges were created in 1459, and at that time it was decided that the master workman of the Cathedral of Strasbourg should be the Grand Master of Masons of Germany. The generally recognized difference between the Steinmetzen, stonemasons, and the Freemasons, at least until the beginning of the 18th century anyway, was that the Steinmetzen were considered operative Masons, that is, men who actually worked with physical stone, and the Freemasons were speculative, or those who used stone as a symbolic or ritual center for their organizational objectives. Eventually the Steinmetzen merged completely into free, speculative, Masonry. When a stone wall becomes merely a thing of symbolism, it begins to represent secrecy and silence. Stonewall, Texas, and the ranch of the Vice President, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was the hypothetical destination of President and Mrs. Kennedy during their November trip to Texas that resulted in the killing of the king. The people of the area around Stonewall, Texas, are predominantly German in origin, and Fredericksburg, Texas, which is only a stone's throw from Stonewall, is often referred to as a German town. The land company that brought the Germans into that area apparently had customers who were stonemasons, walking carpenters, etc. The Walking Carpenters of Germany are a Masonic-like organization, the members of which, much like bashful prostitutes, invariably deny any Masonic affiliation. Such a denial, as long as it can be uttered with impunity, can be readily understood by anyone who understands stonewalling. Subset IL Hertz/Hearts. As seen from Dealey Plaza, a large Hertz sign looms over the Sexton building, apparently dividing it into two right angles. At the time of JFK's murder, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, father of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, rescued the Hertz Yellow Cab Company during a stock crisis. The name Hertz is traceable to Harz or Harz. In the Harz Mountains in Germany is a place called the Brocken where sorcerers were believed to gather. Sometimes an optical phenomena or illusion is glimpsed at the peak of Harz Mountain, and persons see what is known as the specter of Brocken. Brocken. In the 18th century, representatives from witch cults all over Europe made their way to a fertility and death ritual on this mountain, and some were alleged to have been Masons. Masons were believed to have been able to communicate in some voiceless way which was called telepathy by some and empathy by others. Empathy can be described as the feeling of entering into the spirit of a person or thing, and so empathy is synonymous with the rapport of mesmeric Masonry. The witches at the Hearts Mountain Festival came together in sympathetic understanding, rapport, and were in nonverbal communication. In fact, at a given signal, the occult gathering began to cling together in a sort of epoxy of agape, love in, if you will, that became a rite of magica sexualis and ritual intercourse. Hertz is a name renowned in the field of communication. Heinrich Hertz was a German physicist who was the first to investigate electromagnetic waves produced in luminiferous ether, which is a rather archaic way of describing electrical waves which are now known as Hertzian waves. Hertz was instrumental in the theory which led to the development of radio. JFK's ancestry is traced to New Ross, a port town approximately 4 miles from Duganstown, Ireland. In the hamlet of New Ross is a tavern named the Radio Bar, which is owned by one Gus O. Kennedy. Patrick Kennedy, the president's grandfather, frequented this establishment and the proprietor was a distant relation. The long-running advertising battle which droned over the Hertz waves between Avis and Hertz Rent-A-Car corporations involves fertility symbolism. By consulting the Masonic Encyclopedia one will encounter a brief blurb by Dr. Mackey which is probably one of the thinnest cover UPS in the entire work. It is the category of inversion of words. Apparently the Masons wanted to be able to explain away various phrases Cowans, outsiders, might have come across in conversation or study which, without such explanation might be pondered to a degree detrimental to Masonic secrecy. Thus the definition for word inversion is a sort of bewildered disclaimer running along the lines of how did this get here? Poor, befuddled Dr. Albert Mackey of the exalted 33rd degree would have us believe that word inversion is not a central part of Masonic ritual. Anyone recognizing the link between Masonry and Jewish Kabbalism, a connection which might be termed slave master, will note that a central dogma of the Kabbalah is the principle of the inverse Sephiroth as personified by the Klipot or Lords of Chaos. If one inverts the letters of the word Avis as in the rental car corporation, one encounters the Shiva. Shiva is Sanskrit for happy or auspicious. Shiva is also the name of one of the gods in the Hindu triad and in character represents become death, the shatterer of worlds as a certain alchemist once said. The symbol of Shiva is the lingam or penis. Shiva, like Neptune and Satan, is usually pictured with a trident. The words wizard and golden file are formally registered trademarks of Avis Rent-A-Car System Incorporated. The Wizard of Avis, according to advertising propaganda, is a sophisticated computer that remembers everything you tell it, and the golden file is the wizard's permanent file, memory bank. In Latin Avis means bird or omen. Avis is a member of a corporate conglomerate, the center of which is the International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation, which is engaged in millions of electronic exchanges involving the Masonic principle of rapport, the Hearts Mountain principle of empathy, and the fundamentals of magnetic masonry. All of this reminds this writer of the killing of our president on Bloody Elm Street in front of the Sexton building divided by the looming Hertz sign, a tragedy which also wounded Governor John Connolly and car salesman James Thomas Togg. Subset 3 Shrovetide on Tuesday, November 19, 1963, final security arrangements were planned for the Trade Mart facility where the presidential luncheon was planned. Tuesday is associated with operations of death, destruction, hatred, and discord, summoning the spirits of the dead, etc. Shrove Tuesday was the time, according to Druidic custom, for kicking the head around, and it is an activity now called Shrove or Shrovetide football. The custom of kicking the head around can be traced to Chester, England, where the kicking of the head of a decapitated Dane became legend, and to Derby, England, where the heads of ill-fated members of the legions of Rome were used. In modern times, Shrovetide football is played in Shawcroft near Ashbourne, Derbyshire, England, with a white leather ball instead of a head. For a similar substitution see Fellini's Toby Dammit, the third film in the trilogy Spirits of the Dead. Druidism can be considered a synonym for sorcery. Most of their rituals took place in groves of oak trees, and the oak was sacred to them. Recall that Kennedy, or more properly Cianadiac, means wounded or ugly head, that Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy made a pilgrimage to the ancient oak in Thomasville, Georgia. It would be interesting, were it possible, to elicit the comment of a druid on the treatment given Ugly Head at the Trinity site, by the oak tree, on Bloody Elm St. in Dallas, Texas. Subset 4 The Spear of Destiny. Richard Wilhelm Wagner in the musical drama Parsifal, Parzival, depicts Linkser as a sorcerer wielding a spear of destiny, spear of Lingus, Hellige Lance, a talisman of historic power. In the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 19, verses 34 to 37, it is told how a soldier pierced the side of Christ and out of this wound flowed blood and water. The name of this soldier was Gaius Cassius, who attended the crucifixion as the official representative of Pontius Pilate. Also in attendance at Golgotha, the skull, was a guard unit from the Temple of Solomon. The captain of these guards carried the spear of Herod Antipas, king of the Jews, aka the spear of Phineas. Phineas was a Jewish sorcerer and prophet who allegedly forged the spear as the objectification of the magical power inherent in Jewish blood. It was upon this spear that the sponge of vinegar was offered to Christ. It is then alleged that Gaius Cassius, or Longinus as he was also known, to spare Christ the torture of living through the leg and skull breaking which the charming Jewish high priest Caiaphas had ordered, stabbed Christ in the heart between the fourth and fifth ribs. It is a matter of historical dispute whether Longinus seized the Jewish spear or used his own, but forever onward Longinus has come to mean spearman. The spear of Longinus, or spear of destiny, then became a part of the quest for the Holy Grail. This Holy Grail was the elusive dish of which legend claims Christ consumed his Last Supper and into which his blood was caught from his 5 wounds by Joseph of Arimathea. In some circles the story is embroidered to mean that the Grail is the stone of foundation, or lapis exilis, the philosopher's stone of alchemy. In the allegory of the Holy Grail we see how it has come to represent both good and evil, and has been connected in obvious ways with the knightly quests of the Round Table of Camelot, and even with the Masonic claim that Joseph of Arimathea was a Mason and that Christ never resurrected, because he didn't die but rather had been drugged with the equivalent or risperine by Joseph. There was even an anti-Grail. The Klingsor of the anti-Grail was Landulf Il of Capua, Capri, who resided in the Castle Merville, Castle of Wonders. Wolfram, Tunton, calls the Castle of Klingsor by the title Calo en Balot. Klingsor or Landulf II was referred to as the wickedest man of the century and an associate of the corrupt Pope John VIII. The former was required to flee his Castle of Wonders because of its hated reputation for sexual depravity and its alleged alliances with the Nation of Islam. He sought refuge in the occupied Arab territory of Sicily at Carlta Bellata, Calo en Balot, on the exact site of an ancient fertility temple of Aphrodite Porn, where he resumed his occult practices. In the Wagnerian opera, Klingsor and his cronies attempt to rob the followers of the Holy Grail of their vision through ritual sexual perversions, thereby robbing the pious of their celestial guides. Klingsor is sometimes identified as the bishop, Lord of Terra di Liber, of Naples and Capri, and the brother of Queen Sibylla of Sicily. This queen gave birth to a son conceived during a rite of magica sexualis which, when discovered by King Henry VI, was castrated and Klingsor tortured on the rack since he had been the operator, father, during the sex magic. The Klingsor Spear of Destiny is a story of heretical and esoteric Christianity involving Camelot symbolism. In order to make amends with a certain Hugo of Tours, Charlemagne offered him anything he desired, to which Hugo asked for the previous thing kept in a silver casket which Charlemagne had received from Patriarch Fortunatus. The casket alluded to was thought to contain the blood and a portion of the body of Christ along with a fragment from the true cross. Having obtained the object of his desire, Hugo placed it upon a camel, questing beast, and admonished the camel to perform his sacred duty and take the reliquary to its sacred site. Wherever the camel first halted and laid down its burden would become the home of the silver casket. At the height of his battle for Sicily, General Patton visited the Klingsor Castle site at Carlta Bellata in the mountains above Monte Castello, Castle Mountain. Patton was as steeped in mysticism as Adolf Hitler and Rudolf Hess and believed himself to have been reincarnated. Patton sealed off the Oberenschmidt gas in Nuremberg, Germany, when it was rumored that Hitler had possession of the Spear of Destiny and stored it in a secret vault at this location. Patton ordered intelligence agents to locate the spear. Its whereabouts, if it exists at all, are unknown today. Subset V. Castro. The castration performed upon the baby born to the Queen of Sicily and the evil Klingsor is itself imbued with a series of source portents and connotations. This child was greatly mocked, as can be supposed, throughout his life, and a famous slogan was attached to him: "Never did a youth reach old age with such womanly honor." In these legends the child is referred to as a castro, and the word is associated with the loss of the sex organs, particularly with reference to males. Perhaps it will seem far-fetched to those who believe Barbara Walters and George McGovern, but the Castro movement is well known in the mystery and magic of words as a castration movement, and those who participate in it can be said to be political and spiritual eunuchs. This is because Fidel Castro represents Machiavellian murder, while his followers tout him as a man of principle and ideals, when the very opposite is true. Lee Harvey Oswald's theatrical membership in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee has correctly been viewed as a ruse by the leftist conspiracy researchers, but for the wrong reasons. It was not to discredit the left, for the left discredited itself, or self-castrated, when it selected Fidel from among the hordes of murdering, thieving politicians, as a hero of principle. This is the most debased form of self-mockery and controlled politics, and is equivalent to the life of Lee Harvey Oswald. Recall that the name Oswald denotes divine power, and then consider how that potential for good was pilloried by the subsequent events, just as Castro's own Escobedo Che Guevara was murdered with Castro's assistance when Guevara began taking the Castro New Man and Peasant Revolutions scam a bit too literally. Subset 6. Officer Tippett. Patrolman J. D. Tippett was murdered on Friday, November 22, 1963, at 1:18 p.m. in the 400 block of East 10th, and the suspect was said to have been seen fleeing on East 10th and was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater. The suspect's gun, a .38 Special, was recovered and turned over to the Homicide Bureau. This weapon was later identified in greater detail as a .38 Special S&W Victory model revolver bearing serial number V510210. If there ever was a Victory model revolver, would certainly like to see it. The fact is that some of the old guns in the United States were shipped to England at the start of World War I and were loosely termed Victory guns by United States government propagandists. It is utter nonsense to label Oswald's pistol with the formal appellation Victory model revolver, as if that were an official assembly line phrase of the manufacturer. The letter V as part of serial No. V510210 can be considered an arsenal mark, for it was used solely on guns designated United States property. If the revolver with serial No. V510210 was marked United States property, it was not revealed in the Warren Report. This revolver was said to be a .38 that was rechambered as a .38 Special. A cylinder chambered for .38 Special bullets can be interchanged with a cylinder as a .38 in some cases, but cylinders chambered for .38 military ammunition cannot be rechambered for .38 Special ammo, because such a procedure would necessitate the insertion of sleeves, which was not done in the case of revolver V510210. It also should be noted that revolver cylinders are marked to identify the cylinder with the rest of the gun, and one can assume that the revolver in question retained its original cylinder, but no reference was made to the cylinder number by the Dallas police or the FBI. The pistol bearing the serial No. V510210 is of an age indicated by this number, which could be expected to have the number .38.767 on the barrel to indicate the correct size ammunition to be used. Also, if the weapon referred to had been shipped to England among the so-called Victory guns, then it should have also had BNP stamped upon it in one or more places. It should be noted that the barrel of CL5, V510210, was designed for .38 S&W bullets and, therefore, it is slightly larger in diameter than barrels designed for .38 Special bullets. Firing of undersized bullets could cause erratic passage of the bullets down the barrel, resulting in individual microscopic characteristics which are not consistent. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The microscopic characteristics found on bullets that have been fired were obliterated on the bullets that were said to have been taken from the body of J. D. Tippit, and consequently, they could not be identified as having been fired from the V510210 revolver, yet the Warren Commission specifically labeled this weapon as the revolver used in the Tippit killing. Warren Commission Report, Exhibit No. 143, Subset 7. Ferry and Shaw. David W. Ferry and Clay L. Shaw were habitués of the Old Storyville section of the French Quarter of New Orleans, NOLA. One could say that the entire official assassination investigation is a story of the fairy tale genre. David Ferry, Ferry, was discharged from Eastern Airlines for homosexual activity and was said to be completely hairless and often resorted to pasting hair over his eyes, eyebrows, and on his head with, appropriately enough, spirit gum. He was also reputed to have been an exotic loser who failed in everything he did and who engaged in various impostures, pretense of skills and knowledge that he did not possess. So, the mystical charade of the killing of the king, Ferry plays the role of a Medi Castro, quack. Shaw was also a homosexual and flagellant, and hence, since both men were centered in New Orleans, we can begin to understand the influences they were slated to represent in this most publicized of all American murders. New Orleans, Louisiana, is known as Crescent City in reference to the moon and is closely 33 connected to lunacy, rights, prostitution, and every other inversion of the so-called American dream. The CIA station house connected to Oswald, Ferry, and Shaw as well as to the formulation of the JFK killing is or was located in a Masonic temple building, cf. Coincidence or conspiracy, in New Orleans, LA, NOLA. New Orleans will continue to play a major role in the murder, mayhem, and perversion of the coming years. It is invariably in the limelight as a supposedly quaint and spooky place, and at this writing the public encounters it in a paperback book and film called Pretty Baby about prostitution and a 12-year-old child, and in Ishmael Reed's Shrovetide in New Orleans, a mother lode of voodoo, rites which have no end of fascination to foolish people everywhere. Subset 8. Ruby. On December 20, 1947, Jacob Rubenstein changed his name to Jack L. Ruby by decree of the 68th Judicial Court of Dallas, Texas. The etymology of the term ruby runs, French, rubis, Spanish, ruby, Latin, rubinus, carbuncle. In old law books it was once the practice to print some of the titles of the statutes in red, and these were termed rubrics or a ruby, and hence any fixed, formulated, or authoritative injunction of duty was apt to be designated as being a rubric or ruby. As a rubinus or carbuncle, ruby pertains to the breastplate of judgment used by the chosen mispit, high priests, of Jewish sorcery, enabling them to receive divine answers regarding the welfare of Judaism. Some interpretations claim that the breastplate of judgment manifested the immediate presence of Jehovah and was also worn by Masons in Royal Arch chapters. This breastplate contained 12 stones, each symbolizing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The carbuncle or ruby was connected to the tribe of Judah, no peck. The term Jack Ruby was once used by pawnbrokers to indicate a fake ruby. In iconography, a ruby or carbuncle symbolizes blood, suffering, and death. Subset 9. Truth or Consequences. District Attorney for New Orleans, James Garrison, was supported by a Truth and Consequences Club and is alleged to have been an ex-FBI agent and to have been mentally disturbed at one time. Jim Garrison was an outsider in the secret society machinations of the FBI and may very well have been pharmacologically or hypnotically induced to set up his ill-fated investigation and the position he acquired in the Truth and Consequences Commission. Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, is a town located on the 33rd degree of parallel latitude, and near the same latitude John Fitzgerald Kennedy became an oblation, and on the same latitude is the chief temple on this planet, in the minds of sorcerers, namely the Temple of Solomon at Jerusalem, which was once located there and is sworn to be rebuilt on this 33rd degree. This information is of the first priority, and make that statement not because have discovered it but because it simply exists in reality in such a way as to forthrightly indicate the extraordinary nature of the processing of this planet which is taking place. This method and process is summed up in the principle of the making manifest of all that is hidden, which is to seal finally and for all time the allegedly irresistible force of the eternal pagan psychodrama which works through every mass organization of man. In a literal, alchemical sense, the making manifest of all this is hidden is the accomplishment of the third law of the alchemists, and is, as yet, unfulfilled or at least not completed. The other two have been the creation and destruction of primordial matter, the detonation of the first atomic bomb at the Trinity site, at White Sands, New Mexico, on the 33rd degree of parallel, the killing of the king, at the Trinity site, at Dealey Plaza, Dallas, near the 33rd degree of latitude. What remains is for a number of researchers acting through the Freedom of Information Act 34 to make manifest all that is hidden in a way that, according to the enemy, will be irremediably helpful to their cause. This is not a bluff meant to intimidate inquiry, that can only be done with terror of a physical or psychological nature, but human curiosity has never been successfully thwarted by threats of a curse, to say nothing of frustrating those who seek, on a higher level, justice and truth about the arch criminals of all history. Do not wish to discourage either of these actions, but rather supply you with the final information needed to create an object, if you like, which will serve as the immovable object to block their vaunted irresistible force. This attends the recognition of the desensitizing power revelations have over a hoodwinked populace who sink lower and lower as they discover the extent to which they have been duped, and who may, reactively, search for a ruler or drug to put them asleep, to make them less aware. Only the repetition of information presented in conjunction with knowledge of this mechanism of the making manifest of all that is hidden provides the sort of boldness and will which can demonstrate that we are aware of all the enemies, all the opponents, all the tricks and gadgetry, and yet we are still not dissuaded, that we work for the truth for the sake of the truth, and let the rest take upon themselves and their children the consequences of their actions. 182.